I hope you're enjoying this serialized reading of Stavius, Volume 1 in the Chronicles of Mearth trilogy. This is Episode 8. It is the continuation of Chapter 3, where Mark and Stephen learn about being conjoined.
Mark glared back at him and said, "You call it what you like, and I'll call it what I like." Then he changed the subject and asked, "How does time work on these two worlds? It seems like I can be here for days, and yet I wake up the morning after going to bed on Earth." "Ah, a fair question," answered Urtish, happy to be talking about something other than planetary names. "It will settle down once you're fully conjoined. Time passages on the two worlds are not well understood, but are somewhat synchronized. A year here on Earth lasts about the same amount of time as a year back on Earth." Urtish saw the confused expression on Stavius's face and relented. "A year here on Mearth lasts about the same amount of time as a year back on Earth. Mark might dream he spent a day or a month here on Mearth, but will still wake up the next morning on Earth. However, he probably won't have another dream for a month on Earth if he dreamt he was here for that long. It's not exact, but the two timelines seem to be linked together." "How long have you been coming here?" asked Mark.
I'm 53 years old, and this is my 11th year visiting here since we only conjoin in our primes, answered Urtish.
"You keep mentioning being fully conjoined. What do you mean by that?" asked Mark and Stephen. "There will be plenty of time to explain all that," answered Urtish. "You should eat your lunch. It's getting cold, and you've hardly touched anything." "Okay, but one more question. Why isn't Janus sitting here?" asked Mark and Stephen. "This is the heroes' table, and while Janus is called many things, he is not a hero," answered Urtish. "It's best to let him sit alone. This table is reserved for the heroes in training and their guests. The rest of the staff sits at the long table." "Who are the rest of the staff?" asked Mark and Stephen. "We are the hero trainers," answered Urtish. "Several of us are past heroes sharing our experience, while others have been brought here by the Soul Reapers for the sole purpose of training heroes. Every one of us is an expert in our field." My, that was an especially delicious lunch. Mark looked out over the faces seated at the long table. Most appeared to be in their 20s or 30s. All seemed to be healthy and fit. It was an impressive collection of educators who were all primed and ready to focus on their one current student. "So when do we start?" Urtish laughed and replied, "Oh, we aren't going to train you. What would be the point?" There was a murmur of agreement and a ripple of laughter among the other trainers who had overheard Urtish's remark. "What do you mean you aren't going to train us?" Mark and Stephen asked in disbelief. "Didn't you just say that was your job?" "Well, yes and no," answered Urtish. "You see, we already trained your three counterparts and sent them off to fulfill the prophecy. There is no way we could bring you up to a useful level before they either succeed or fail. Besides, you don't have the qualifications." "Wait a minute," growled both Mark and Stephen. The two boys might be different in many ways, but both had a common dislike for unfairness, and both had quick tempers. "Didn't the Soul Reapers select us for this role?" "Yes," admitted Urtish as he stuffed some more corn in his mouth, "but they sometimes make mistakes."
"Not only have you arrived far too late in the year, you are different ages.
Also, Stephen is far too old and is both physically and magically underqualified. Heroes must be top-notch magicians." "I might not be some mighty warlock, but you can train me," argued Stephen, "and I am far more physically qualified than some 13-year-old. "I'm sorry, but while we can hone magical abilities, we're not in the business of remedial magic training," said Urtish. "And while you might be larger than a 13-year-old,
We've heard about your fighting prowess with that chicken."
I'd hardly say that you've proven yourself to be a warrior." The entire table of people laughed, while the two mentally joined boys grew flushed with anger. Stephen quickly stood up and addressed the long table. "Let me get this straight. You are deciding not to do your duty because you feel we are unworthy. And, correct me if I'm wrong, you are nothing but a bunch of hero wannabes or ex-heroes who have failed in your attempts at fulfilling this prophecy. We wouldn't even be here if you had ever succeeded in training any heroes to fulfill the prophecy. So, please explain to me what gives a bunch of losers the right to determine, no, make that the very ability to even recognize potential hero greatness. I really want to know." All conversation had stopped when Staven said ex-heroes, and no one had moved since. Even Urtish had stopped eating and was now glaring at Staven and Mark. That was incredibly rude, insensitive, and downright mean, Stavius, he whispered. You should not have said it. Both Mark and Staven knew he was right, but neither could control his anger, and Mark answered, Maybe it was insensitive, but you know that it's all true. Just do your job and train us. Then Staven sat down. No, it is not true, Stavius, but we will train you if you wish, Urtish softly said with a decided edge to his voice.
He looked profoundly offended and almost shook with rage.
I promise you that it will be intense after your little outburst. I doubt you will find it at all enjoyable. I'll meet you in the cave at 3 o'clock for your first history lesson. I suggest you find a way to get some perspective before then. Also, you shall henceforth be dining alone at the hero's table. Urtish and the rest of the trainers then rose and left the dining area without a word. Staven sighed and thought, What have we done, Mark? He stood to go and felt a tap on his shoulder. One of the villagers was standing close and said, Stavius, I'm one of your fighting instructors, and I just wanted to introduce myself. He then threw a right hook without warning. Mark saw it coming but couldn't get Staven to put up a block, and the man's fist connected with Staven's jaw, knocking him to the ground. That's enough, Cran, came a deep voice from a few yards away. We'll begin his physical training tomorrow. Be on the tournament field at 9 tomorrow morning, Stavius. And I advise you learn how to duck a punch. Staven sat up and rubbed his jaw. His head was spinning, his face hurt, and he tasted blood. But he didn't think there was any permanent damage. Let me help you up, said a soft, feminine voice with an extended hand. You could use a lesson in perspective before you go any further. Mark saw a pretty young woman who was perhaps 18 or 19 years old smile at them. Staven was still groggy, so Mark said, Okay, what do you mean by perspective? She said, My name is Myra, and the first thing you should know is that your opinion of the people here is completely wrong. She then led him to sit under a small stand of trees overhanging the river on the far side of the village. Very few trainers are ex-heroes because very few heroes survive. In fact, I can only think of 3 who have ever returned from their attempts. The rest of us were never selected to be heroes, but have instead dedicated our lives to trying to help you succeed. So we pretty much insulted the only people who can help us, groaned Mark and Staven. Yes, and it is unforgivable, added Mayra. Everyone here will go through the motions of training you, but no one will truly put their heart into it. You have hurt us more than you can imagine. What you said was untrue, yet it is our greatest unspoken fear. No hero has ever succeeded, even though they are all hand-selected by the Soul Reapers. We fear that their failures were due to us being deficient in our roles. To hear that accusation shouted out loud by a hero trainee is beyond heartbreaking.
Oh, crud, said Mark and Staven.
We had no idea. We were just both so mad at not being given a chance. Well, now you're getting one, said Mayra. The second thing you need to do is to join completely. You'll never be any good to anyone as long as you are separate. Mark and Staven gave a perplexed look, so Mayra continued. It is clear that you are still not fully conjoined, boys, she began. For example, what's your name? Mark and Staven, and we're calling ourselves Stavius when we're together? Mark replied in a way which is more of a question than an answer. Exactly, Mayra agreed. You're both sharing Staven's brain and body, but you both still have your own unique identities. I bet that Mark is pretty much hanging back and watching while Staven is in charge. Not as much as he should, muttered Staven. You see, you're both in there, continued Mayra as she jabbed at Staven's head, but you haven't combined your minds into a single consciousness. You haven't yet lost the independent Mark and Staven identities to truly create Stavius. You won't realize your true capabilities until you do. Hey, I don't like the sound of losing my identity, and I bet Mark doesn't either, complained Staven. Perhaps, but it's what you need to do, Mayra assured them. As scary as combining your identity sounds, it is far worse when you separate. Staven, You're going to be combined with Mark nonstop until whosever birthday is next. Then you'll separate after a year together, and you'll feel alone and empty until you're both in your primes again. You will have experienced a whole different world through Mark's memories and have had his abilities as part of your own. Then one day, it will all be gone in an instant. What about me? Asked Mark. You will have a different challenge, Mark.
You'll separate from Staven and go on living a life in your world completely oblivious to what happens here.
As you already know, this is all just a dream that is forgotten when you wake up. However, you'll need to adjust to being Stavius every time you return. In some ways, it is easier for you because you won't remember any of this, but that also makes it sad and depressing. All I can say is that the experience of being conjoined is unlike anything you can imagine and is completely worth it. Okay, so what do we need to do? Asked Mark. Staven still wasn't entirely convinced. You'll need to figure that out for yourself, answered Mayra. It requires complete trust and commitment, so most people start by sharing their deepest secrets. You have to accept that your combined entity will know everything each of you knows once you completely merge. There can be no secrets. Mayra sat with an expectant look on her face. Are you conjoined? Asked Mark. Not this year, admitted Mayra, which is why I'm not officially an instructor. You're only allowed to be an instructor in your prime, although you can certainly be an assistant. So why are you instructing us then? Asked Staven. Because you need it, because no one else wants to help you, and because it beats washing dishes, laughed Mayra. Okay, so let's hear your deepest, darkest secrets. It's the first step to becoming fully conjoined, and you are going to need your wits about you before tomorrow's fighting class. I'm still struggling about sharing my secrets with Mark, said Staven. I'm pretty sure I'm not ready to share them with you, too. Fair enough, said Mayra as she stood and brushed the leaves off her skirt. I'll leave you two alone to share amongst yourselves. Don't hold back. Then try doing things together. For example, try seeing the world as Mark sees it, or as Staven sees it. You'll discover that you have different points of view, and will find that everything changes when you combine them. I wish I could describe it better, but you'll know when it starts to happen. Good luck. With that remark, she promptly turned and strode off in a swish of skirts.
I'm Gregory Chumley. Learn more about the Chronicles of Mearth and purchase books on Amazon or at www.cholmonco.com/Mearth. Cholmonco storyteller books are an exciting innovation in reading. Each chapter contains a QR code which you can scan with your smartphone to listen to streaming audio of me telling you the story while you read.